Hello, students. Have you ever stopped to think about the things you use every day, like your phone or maybe your shoes? How are they actually made? Well, it's a fascinating journey that often stretches across the entire world. And today, we're going to understand how this interlinking of production across countries works. It's something that has totally changed the world of economics.
So, here is our plan for today. First, we'll take a little trip back in time to see how things were made before all these changes. Then we'll get to know the main players in this story, the MNCs. We'll understand what they are and the role that investment plays. After that, we'll see exactly how they control production and, very importantly, what impact this has on local producers. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a quick summary. Ready? Let's begin.
All right, first things first. Let's start by looking at the past. You see, to really understand the big changes that have happened, we need to have a clear picture of how things used to be.
Just think about this for a moment. Not so long ago, if something was labeled made in India, it meant that pretty much everything, from the raw materials to the final finished product, was done right here, inside India's borders. The main connection between countries was trade. They would trade raw materials or finished goods. But today, it's a completely different world. Production is like a giant, complex global puzzle. Different parts are made in different countries, and it's all put together and organized by these huge companies.
So, this huge global shift has a main character, a key player. And that is the MNC, which stands for Multinational Corporation. I'm sure you've heard this term before, but let's break down exactly what an MNC is, because they are so important to our story.
Okay, so here's the textbook definition. An MNC is a company that owns or controls production in more than one nation. Now, the two key words here are owns or controls. This is really important. It doesn't just mean they sell their products in many countries, it means they are actively involved in making their products in different countries.
To make this clearer, let's take an example. Imagine a big American MNC that makes some kind of industrial equipment. So what do? Step 1. The design work is probably done by engineers in the USA. Step 2. They get the components, the different parts, manufactured in China because it's cheaper there. Step 3. These parts are then sent to maybe Mexico or a country in Eastern Europe to be assembled into the final product. Why there? Because it's close to the big markets in Europe and America. Step 4. And what about customer care? Well, if you have a problem with the equipment, you might call a helpline. And the person you talk to could be sitting in a call center right here in India, because we have a large number of skilled English-speaking youth. And finally, step 5, the finished product is sold all over the world. See? It's like a global assembly line.
And, it's not just about physical goods you can touch. Services are also produced globally. This picture of a call center in Bangalore is a fantastic example. The service here is customer support, and it's being produced in India and delivered instantly to customers who could be thousands of kilometers away.
Now you might be wondering, how do these MNCs set up all these factories and offices all over the world? Where does the money come from? Well, the simple answer is money, but the correct economic term is investment. You can think of investment as the fuel that makes this whole engine of global production run.
When an MNC from one country spends money to buy assets like land, a building, or new machines in another country, we call this foreign investment. Let's just break that down. It's foreign because the money is coming from a company in a foreign country. And it's an investment because the company is spending this money with the hope of making profits from these assets in the future.
Let's make this even simpler with an everyday example. Imagine your friend has a small workshop, and you give them some money to buy a new, better machine. That's an investment, right? Now, just imagine that instead of you, it's a company from America that gives money to a company in India to buy new machines. That is what we call foreign investment. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now we know what MNCs are, and we know they use something called foreign investment. So the next question is, how do they actually do it? How do they use this money to set up and control production in other countries? Well, there are usually 3 main ways, or 3 main pathways they follow.
The first method is to team up, to form a partnership with a local company that's already there. For the local company, this is often a very good deal. They get 2 major benefits. First, the MNC brings in that foreign investment, that extra money, to buy new machines and produce things faster. And second, the MNC usually brings with it the latest technology, which the local company can now also use.
But partnering is not the only way. Sometimes an MNC wants complete control. They don't want a partner. A great example is Cargo Foods. It's a very large American MNC, and it simply bought an Indian company called Parag Foods. This takes us to the second, and in fact the most common method.
That's right.
The most common way for an MNC to set up shop is not to partner, but to just buy a local company outright. Think about it. These MNCs have huge amounts of money, way more than most local companies. So for them, it's quite easy to just buy a smaller company. And once they've bought it, like Cargill bought Parak Foods, they are in complete control and can expand production as they wish.
Now, this third method is very interesting because here, the MNC doesn't even own a factory. Instead, what they do is they place huge orders with lots of small, local producers for things like garments, footwear, or sports items. These small producers make the products, and the MNC then just puts its own brand name on them and sells them to you and me all over the world.
Now, you can imagine the kind of power this gives the MNC. They don't have the headache of running a factory, but they control everything. They decide the price, the quality standards, the delivery time, everything. And if the costs for one small producer go up, maybe the workers ask for higher wages, the MNC can simply cancel the order and give it to another producer in another country. This means the small producers are in a very weak, very vulnerable position.
So we have seen the different ways that MNCs operate. But the big question is, what is the final result of all this? What is the effect on the local companies and the workers in countries like ours? Well, like with many things in economics, there are two sides to this coin. There are some positives and there are some negatives.
Let's break down the impact. On the positive side, when an MNC partners with a local company, it brings in much needed money and new technology. This can create new jobs, which is always good. But on the other hand, there's a negative side. Many small local manufacturers simply cannot compete with these giant MNCs, and they might have to shut down. And even for the workers in the factories, there's always this pressure from the MNC to keep costs low. This can mean that their wages don't increase and their jobs are not very secure.
All right, we have covered a good amount of ground today. So let's take a moment to pull everything together and do a quick summary of the main points that we've learned.
So what are the key takeaways? First, production is no longer just local, it is now spread all across the globe. Second, the main players doing this are MNCs, companies that control production in many nations. Third, they do this using money called foreign investment. Fourth, they connect production in three main ways: by partnering with local firms, by buying them, or by placing large orders with small producers. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this entire process has a very strong influence on producers and workers in distant locations, an influence that can be both good and bad.
So we have a clear idea now of how the production of things is getting connected across the world. But this leads to another very important question. If the making of things is getting connected, what does that mean for the selling of things? In other words, how does this connection of production lead to a connection of markets? That is a very interesting topic, and it's what we will explore in our next session. Thank you.